So welcome. This is actually class 10 of, or
Of six.
episode, what?
Of 6.
10 of 6. Did I first say they were only giving me 6? Probably. Episode 10 of this series that we started back in early summer called Shambhala 101. So we're, a couple of years ago, we spent probably at least a year on a series we called Buddhism 101. And then some wise person in the spring said, well, we're a Shambhala center. We don't really know much about this, whatever this thing is called Shambhala. So that's when the idea came up to offer something somewhat similar that we call Shambhala 101. And Shambhala is actually, it's a Sanskrit word. We in our community did not invent it. It's quite ancient. And it means source of happiness or source of prosperity. And the name actually points to this pre-Buddhist, pan-Asian, maybe even universal in some sense, kind of dream myth of a society or a kingdom or a community that's peaceful and prosperous, where people care for each other and bring out the best in human society. Kind of I don't know if it's a Garden of Eden thing, or Camelot, but there's just myths all over, and so Shambhala is one of those myths. But as myths go, it got scooped up into the Buddhist teachings, and then from there came to us in the West in the modern times from a Tibetan teacher named Chogyam Trungpa, who's really used. He says this is where the name comes from, but I want to use it to brand, we might say, or to kind of categorize the way I want to teach about meditation, basically, and Buddhism. I want to teach it in a way that really brings in how do we mobilize our courage and compassion and intelligence to actually make a difference in our world as well as for ourselves. None of which is in this, in these notes, but that's what we've been doing. We've been kind of walking through some of those themes and doing it most recently, the past several weeks, we're kind of doing it by tracing Chogyam Trungpa's life, because he's so formative for us in our network of centers as to what we're doing. And he has a very interesting life, so we've been doing that. But just to start out, I always, and if I don't do this, you got to remind me, but try to tie it back to meditation, which is really why we all come. And you can meditate in all different kinds of situations, right? Because what is meditation? It's really our chance to let go of all our performance and competition and stories that we tell ourselves and ways we blame ourselves and all of that, and just be, and just rest and be and go and find our core humanity, our core human nature. We can meditate anywhere, but on the other hand, it's helpful to meditate in a context that's supportive of meditation. Because just sitting and being with ourselves is not our typical way of being. And so it helps to, just have a lot of reminders. So in our setting, we have people who we meditate with. We've got a lot of symbolism here of different aspects of the mind and meditation. And also, you don't need a philosophy to meditate, but since we're human beings, we always like some kind of philosophy or meaning context. We usually do. And so So Shambhala then has some kind of a meaning context. And the meaning context actually is really built on the Buddhist view. And a particular feature of the Buddhist view, if you know it, and most people know the story of the Buddha as the founding figure, the historical Buddha. I wrote down that this is a meme. I'm not sure what a meme is actually, but if that isn't what this is, stop me. But it's like this repetitive theme, and the repetitive theme in Buddhism, one of them is leaving home. So this is the story of the Buddha. He was brought up as a prince in this luxurious palace, and then at some point in his early 30s, he says, "That's not for me. I want something more meaningful and bigger." And so he leaves home. And it seems that if you look at his story, it seems like it's that kind of leaving home and kind of shedding all of that familiarity, his early life, his family, his parents, his wife. Then he went and studied with a Hindu holy man, I guess he wasn't Hindu, but a holy man of that era, and became an ascetic, and then he left that, it's one of those troubled children, and just went off on his own. So it's that, constant sort of being willing to turn and go the other way, his way. That's really characteristic. And some of us in the community, not everybody, but some of us have also become Buddhists. And how you become Buddhist is you do this thing called taking refuge, which actually turns out to mean you're becoming a refugee, right? So it also has that quality of leaving home, because what you say when you become a Buddhist is, well, all the things I was trying to accumulate and all of that kind of fortification of me and who I am, I'm going to let that go. Even though it's very comfortable, it's also very constraining, just like the Buddha. And so I'm going to go in a different direction, open. I have supports. The Buddha is an example, the Dharma's teachings, the Sangha as a family, as a support network. But basically, I'm going to open myself up to what is the world really like, and how am I going to be in it. So going back to Chogyam Trungpa, it's also in a story of leaving home, really his early story, which is that he was raised as a very young child to be the lead teacher of one of the major monasteries in the part of Tibet closer to the Chinese border, which is eastern Tibet. And was raised the same way the Dalai Lama was raised, isolated from his family, and taught the rituals, and also intensive Buddhist studies, traveling around, and really set up for this whole life to do that. And then, this is the 1950s, he was born in 1940. The Chinese invaded and basically took over Tibet, started actually burning monasteries, imprisoning lamas and shooting people. So he, along with many other people of his generation, not all of them, but a whole set of those teachers, became refugees and actually walked over the Himalayas out of Tibet into India. So that's like leaving home majorly. And then your home falls apart, or your home is falling apart, so you leave. And I think we've been talking about what that journey was like, and last week I know we were talking about the kind of internal fortitude that it takes to not blame your enemies, but to actually say, wow, that's almost like stuff happens, you know. That sounds too trivial, but it's like the karma and the conditions of the situation caused all that to happen. Actually, we were talking about the fact that there's less generational trauma than you might expect in the Tibetan population because possibly of that framing of this is the karma of this circumstance. And then the emphasis on, okay, now what do I do going forward? So I'm going to call him Rinpoche. That means precious teacher. Rinpoche he crossed the Brahmaputra River and he arrived in India like January, 1st of January, I think he was in India of 1960. And he stayed in India until September of 1963 when he left for England. So an interesting period of 2.5 years. The first thing that happened to him and his party is they were placed in a refugee camp. They had set up several refugee camps there along the border. India was really good about accepting Tibetan refugees, but at the same time it wasn't that wealthy. And so it's not like, they could immediately provide for everybody. So he was supposed to stay in this refugee camp. What they had the Tibetan refugees doing was building roads and chopping rocks, and he didn't want to do that. So he actually escaped without a permit and left the refugee camp and then figured out how to get to Sikkim, which is where the head of his lineage, the Karmapa, the 16th Karmapa, had gotten to earlier and was starting to build monasteries, kind of like you see, and then you see it with the Dalai Lama too, is like one of the first things that most of those lamas did was try to reestablish another monastery, but in India. So there's lots of Tibetan monasteries in India. So he goes to the Karmapa's monastery, which is called Rumtek in Sikkim. And they're all glad to see him and all that, and they say, well, we have a place for you here. You're one of our lamas, so we have a place for you, and you can do this job. And he said, it said in the book that they didn't quite say no, but he said, I think I'm going to Kalimpong. And so he left again, he goes to Kalimpong. While he's doing this, he starts meeting these various British and Canadian expats who are living in India. And he finds out that he really likes them. And he really wants to learn English, which he does quickly. But he's impressed with, he met a woman named Francesca Betty, I think. Betty is her last name, who was working, she was really running the welfare in these refugee camps and just the compassion that she was showing. He met another gentleman who was an Oxford Don who was living in Kalimpong, I think, and he liked just the intelligence and talking about religion with him and just kind of the expanding of his horizons. So it seems to be at that point that he decides that what he really wants to do is come to the West and see what it's like to teach Buddha Dharma in the West. I mean, that's what he's born all his life to do, is teach Buddhism, but to actually uproot and to do it here in a different language. He then, out of Kalimpong, this was interesting, set up a school for young lamas who were supposed to be for this young men that had left Tibet and were trained to be monks and Buddhist teachers. But here they were in India. This was really funny. So they were living in Delhi, but they decided that they couldn't put the school for lamas in Delhi because it was too distracting. It was too modern and too many women. The young lamas were not going to be able to be lamas in that setting, so they put it in Dalhousie, which is somewhere, I guess, north in the hills. So he did that now for a couple years. First, he set it up on his own, and then the Tibetan government in exile, which had formed around the Dalai Lama, who was over in Dharamsala, kind of absorbed the school. So then he and his friend who was with him became civil servants, and they had a salary from the Tibetan government in exile. But the Tibetan government, this is so complicated and so classic. It's like the Dalai Lama's from one particular school of Buddhism, and Chogyam Trungpa's from a different school of Buddhism. And those two schools never quite saw eye to eye on things. They're different styles. So apparently the government in exile, the government of Tibet, decided that they wanted to have people from their school running the school for young lamas. So they told Trungpa and his friend that they had a new job for them. They were going to be Buddhist missionaries to Sri Lanka. It said in that book, they did not want to go to Sri Lanka because it's too hot. India was hot enough, but it's like not to Sri Lanka. But it says in there that, the whole time they were doing that, he said they were really being very good Buddhist monks and wearing their robes and keeping all the precepts and staying out of trouble. They figured out that the only way to actually get a passport from the government in exile to travel around was to go study somewhere. So he kind of leveraged his friends in the expat community, and he got a scholarship to Oxford, England, to study comparative religions, which was actually perfect for what he wanted to do. So there's a whole description of the first time he and his friends saw the ocean when they were about to get on the steamship to go to England. It said in the book, it said, in the Tibetan tradition, they use the word ocean a lot as a metaphor for this vast space. And one of Trungpa's Dharma names is actually Chukigato, means
Ocean of Dharma.
Ocean of Dharma. But most Tibetans never actually have seen the ocean. So it's like this experience of actually seeing the ocean. Page. So anyway, he goes to study in England. And I was just struck in reading that again about, okay, so leaves home in Tibet, right? Then he leaves the monastery, Karmapa's monastery, because he's going to do something else. Then he has this cushy, I don't know how cushy it was, but a secure government job, and he leaves that. And he just keeps on doing that, It's like, kind of like repeating that Buddha story over and over again. It's like, it wasn't, I don't know, that whereas I think that we would gravitate towards some kind of security and stability, he was gravitating in the other direction. So, I suppose we'll talk about that, I guess, more. I guess in a way he continues to do that because at some point in his years in England, he decides he doesn't need even to be a monk anymore. And so he gives up his monk robes and gets married to an English woman. But before that, I guess just before that, we and his students in the community have some of his, not a ton, but some of his recorded talks from his early time in England, and some students who met him there, and their account of him. We also have the Sadhana of Mahamudra that we've been doing a course on, which is a teaching that he wrote in those years. But one of the things we have is I've only seen this excerpt from a diary that he kept. And I wanted to read it to you because I think, to me, it kind of sets the stage for some of the, I'm going to say the flavor, or the atmosphere that we have in the community of Shambhala, which is really just a context for meditation practice and teachings. So this is what he wrote. In particular, my own situation is due to the fact that no one could understand everything altogether, both worldly and spiritual views, and how to live one's life. This is not to say that I am more skilled, more learned, and more experienced in the Dharma. There are many people who are more learned than I and more elevated in their wisdom. However, I have never made a separation between the spiritual and the worldly. If you understand the ultimate aspect of the Dharma, this is the ultimate aspect of the world. And if you should cultivate the ultimate aspect of the world, this should be in harmony with the Dharma. I am alone in presenting the tradition of thinking in this way. Therefore, since I have no ultimate heart friend other than myself alone, I think that it is definite that no one can create an ultimate home or family for me. Still, strangely, this home of being homeless is my home wherever I go. Everything is my home, the great home of being homeless. So, the two features I think that I wanted to highlight that are really part of our heritage, one is this pluralistic view that which not everybody exemplifies, but it's definitely in our bloodstream, which is that there's all kinds of human wisdom. Because basically there's human wisdom, right? And then it manifests in all these different cultural settings and forms with different language and philosophies. And so this great adventure of finding what each tradition has to offer and how to get, I'm clapping my hands, but it's like how to get the synergy of those together. In later years, our community, Trungpa founded a college that's in Boulder, Colorado called Naropa University. It's now a university, and that was very much the spirit of it, like interfaith dialogues, Buddhists and Christians, and how the arts interface with psychology and how philosophy, different kinds of philosophy, and it was really meant to be that kind of synergistic feeling. So that's one piece. And then the other thing, which you see a lot in Trungpa Rinpoche's teachings, is always trying to, I'm going to say, challenge the bubble of spirituality and religion. And I think in part this is partly a critique of the traditional Tibetan system, which was so theocratic, where the religious authorities ran everything, and then you have, the spiritual life, which is very special, et cetera, et cetera. And he's always trying to challenge that and to say, even more. He saw that, I think, as kind of the danger of it. Not that he doesn't appreciate the spiritual teachings, but that the danger of it was you get religious, and then everything. We've talked a lot about the problems of belief. where somebody tells you, well, that's the way it is, because that's the way it is in our authority, and trying to challenge that is one of his first books, was called Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism, which was all about how easy it is for the spiritual teachings to become fetishized, can I say that? Or sort of just a way to make us feel good. And so he was always trying to challenge that. And it brings us to a different view, which is that, okay, well, how can my worldly life, my mundane life, embody my spiritual beliefs or my spiritual experience? So how can I not, almost like, we have Saturday Jews and Sunday Christians, and how do we not do that, but have it be more like everything you do? I mean, he would always say, like, you pick up a glass of water. That's a Dharma teaching. What clothes you choose to wear is a teaching, and how you talk to others, of course, is a teaching. So it's permeated that. It struck me, when he wrote that diary, he felt like he was alone as somebody who talked about that. It strikes me that Thich Nhat Hanh talks about that also. I'm sure other teachers do now too. But he may have felt that he didn't have anybody in the Tibetan tradition that was saying that way. But there are other teachers. And then I thought, why is this related to his, why did he put those two things in the same passage? I feel homeless, that I don't feel rooted, and I combine my spiritual and worldly life. Well, it struck me that Thich Nhat Hanh also was a refugee, right? He was kicked out of Vietnam for challenging the hierarchy around the war. So I think I'll just leave that as a ponder, that maybe it's just that if we're willing to turn towards the unfamiliar, if we can't rely on our usual stuff, and then the door is open, and then everything we do can be infused with some kind of uplifting meaning. About 2 minutes, any comments? I think we were talking about this last week, it's not, some people like the historical Buddha choose to become homeless. And then some people, like Trungpa Rinpoche, had no choice. His home fell apart. And that it turns out, I think, for us, as our world gets stranger and stranger, even the weather gets stranger, the politics get stranger, that in a way we could say, well, what if we considered that we're becoming homeless? And what would that mean for us? Okay, I'm just going to leave that out there as a query. So, you're welcome to take a stretch. I'm going to light the shrine, and what we do is 25 minutes of meditation practice, 10 minutes of walking meditation, and then your option to keep meditating or come and have refreshments and talk about homeless or whatever we want.